On the night Jesus was betrayed, someone lost an ear and gained a second chance. While swords were being raised, blood was falling to the ground, and chaos reigned in Gethsemane, Jesus did something that almost no one noticed. He healed an enemy at the exact moment he was being arrested. The man's name was Malchus, a servant, a stranger, but also the character of one of the most forgotten miracles of the Bible. And the question that nobody usually asks is, why did Jesus stop everything to heal someone who came to arrest him? Before we continue, I want to know, if you were in Jesus' place, would you have reacted with mercy or with the sword? Write in the comments, mercy or sword. If you want to understand the deeper meaning of this gesture, the last miracle before the cross, a lesson about violence, forgiveness, and obedience, sign up now, because this story can change the way you see Jesus and yourself. That was no ordinary night. The Gethsemane, it was shrouded in silence, but it was not a peaceful silence. It was the kind of silence that precedes a tragedy. The wind passed through the olive trees as Jesus withdrew from his disciples to pray. His body was there, but his soul carried the weight of all that was about to happen. There, in that garden, Jesus sweated drops of blood, not only out of fear of physical pain, but because of the spiritual dimension of what was to come. He knew that Jesus' arrest in Gethsemane, it wasn't an accident of history, it was part of the plan. In the distance, torches began to appear in the darkness. Organized footsteps, firm voices. They were not pilgrims. They were not curious onlookers. They were men sent to arrest the Son of God. Among them were soldiers, religious leaders, and a servant of the high priest, an ordinary man, unaware that his name would endure through the centuries, Malchus. The garden, which minutes before had been a place of prayer, was about to become the scene of violence, blood, and a miracle that almost no one remembers. And when the first step was taken toward Jesus, the silence was finally broken. And it is precisely at that moment that everything spirals out of control. Torches illuminated tense faces, armor gleaming in the darkness of the garden. This was no ordinary crowd. It was an organized force, sent with a clear mission: arrest Jesus. In the midst of them, almost invisible to the eyes of history, was Malchus. He was not a leader. He did not wield authority. He did not give orders. Malchus was barely the high priest's servant, someone accustomed to obeying, to following instructions, to staying on the sidelines of major events. At that moment, Malchus did not go to Gethsemane out of faith. He went out of duty. He wasn't looking for a miracle. He wasn't expecting to find the Messiah. He was just following orders, without knowing he was about to step into the center of a little-known biblical story, but laden with timeless meaning. While the disciples awoke, startled, and Jesus rose from prayer, Malchus advanced with the soldiers. Each step brought him closer to a confrontation that would change his life, not by choice, but by being in the wrong place, at the wrong time, in front of the right person. And it is precisely when no one pays attention to the servant that a disciple decides to act. The next move will not come from Jesus, it will come from Peter. Fear gripped the disciples. Everything happened too fast. Voices rose, orders were given, and in that moment of absolute tension, Pedro did what he knew how to do when his heart spoke louder than reason. He didn't wait for instructions. He did not hear the prayer from minutes before. He drew his sword. At Peter's sword, she cut through the air violently, driven by zeal, misdirected love, and pure despair. It wasn't a strategic gesture. It was a reflex, a human act in the face of the incomprehensible. And then the blow landed. Pedro cuts off Malchus' ear. The high priest's servant fell to the ground, wounded, bleeding, screaming. In a second, Malchus ceased to be just a name lost in the crowd and became the symbol of the chaos of that night. There, before Jesus, stood two opposing forces. Pedro's impulsiveness and the silent path of obedience. Pedro believed he was defending the master, but without realizing it, he was fighting against God's own plan. And at that exact moment, With blood flowing and weapons still raised, it seemed that violence had won. But Jesus had not yet said his last word, and when he speaks, the impossible happens. The Garden of Gethsemane was overtaken by chaos. The cry of Malchus, the sound echoed through the night. Blood streamed down the servant's face, a mixture of pain, fear, and disbelief. Soldiers tightened their grip on spears. The disciples retreated. Everything indicated that the situation was about to explode. A violence, once released, it seemed impossible to contain. It was the starkest portrayal of human conflict, men trying to protect what they love and hurting those who shouldn't be hurt. The chaos stemmed not only from weapons, but from confused hearts. There it was, Malchus in the Bible, not as a villain, not as a hero, but as a victim of a moment when faith gave way to impulse. The Gethsemane, the place, once a setting for prayer and surrender, had now become a scene of suffering, and everyone was waiting for Jesus' reaction. He could escape, he could allow the violence, he could let the conflict run its natural course, but Jesus did exactly the opposite. And when he moves, the chaos begins to recede. Jesus stepped forward, while soldiers still held weapons and the floor of Gethsemane was stained with blood. He stopped the violence with an authority that did not come from force, but from compassion. He looked at Peter, and he told him to put away the sword. Then Jesus turned to Malchus, the man who had come to arrest him, the wounded servant, the enemy in the eyes of humans. Jesus bent down, touched the man's face, and healed Malchus's ear. There, in the middle of Jesus' arrest in Gethsemane, something happened that made absolutely no sense according to the logic of the world. Jesus heals the man who came to arrest him. There was no applause. There were no crowds. There were no witnesses to the ceremony. It was a silent miracle. One Jesus miracle in prison, an act of mercy at the very moment he was losing his freedom. The chaos was silenced, the pain was restored, and the violence was disarmed, not with another sword, but with love. And that simple gesture carried an eternal weight. That healing was not just an act of kindness. She made a definitive mark. A Malchus's ear healing, he was Jesus' last miracle before the crucifixion, not to liberate himself, not to prove his power, but to restore someone who was on the opposite side of history. While Malchus was being healed, Jesus was being handcuffed. While the servant recovered what he had lost, the Messiah voluntarily walked towards the cross. This detail makes everything even more impactful. Jesus used his last supernatural act, not to escape the pain, but for teaching, to teach that the kingdom of God does not advance by force, to teach that mercy can exist even in extreme suffering, to teach that violence is never the path to heaven. Therefore, this is a Jesus-forgotten miracle. Because he doesn't glorify spectacle, he confronts the heart. That night, Jesus made it clear, true power doesn't lie in hurting, but in restoring, even when it costs everything. And this choice completely changes the meaning of the cross. The dinner was paradoxical. Malchus, the servant of the high priest, was standing again. The pain had ceased. The wound had disappeared. What had been lost had been restored, and Jesus was imprisoned. The man who had been healed walked freely. The man who healed was still in chains. There they were, face to face, the wounded servant and the Messiah. One represented the religious power of the time, the other the kingdom of God itself, voluntarily surrendering itself. None of that happened by chance. Jesus did not lose control of the situation. He chose, I couldn't resist. He chose to suffer. He chose to love until the end. This moment reveals something profound about Jesus and mercy in suffering. He not only preached love for enemies, he lived it in the most difficult moment of his mission. And as the soldiers led Jesus away, a question hung in the air. What did Malchus do after that? The Bible doesn't provide the answer, but the silence of history is an invitation to reflection, and it is in this silence that the most powerful lesson begins to echo. That night, Jesus taught more with one gesture than many do with words. When Peter raised his sword, he believed he was defending the kingdom. But Jesus showed that the kingdom of God is not established through violence, and rather through love that confronts hatred without reproducing it. There, in Gethsemane, the contrast between two paths became clear: the path of human reaction, driven by fear, and the divine path, sustained by mercy by healing Malchus. Jesus left a definitive lesson on violence. He showed that hurting in the name of faith does not glorify God. On the contrary, it distorts everything he represents. This was an act of forgiveness towards enemies, not in a comfortable speech, but at the most unjust moment of his life. Jesus forgave while being betrayed, arrested, and abandoned. And that's what makes this story so perplexing. Jesus did not conquer evil by attacking. He won, not becoming like him. But why has such a powerful gesture almost disappeared from people's memory? Curiously, this miracle receives almost no attention. There are no crowds of amazement. There are no cries of glory. There is no public celebration. Perhaps that's why he became one. Jesus' forgotten miracle. Malchus' healing isn't meant to impress. It's meant to confront. She reveals a Messiah who does not act as we expect, who does not respond to injustice with revenge, nor to violence with more violence. This is a little-known biblical story because it dismantles our narratives of power. It shows that Jesus is not interested in winning debates, defeating enemies, or proving authority through force. He prefers to heal, even when this doesn't change the course of events, even when that doesn't prevent the cross. This miracle forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. If Jesus chose to love when he had every right to react, what does that say about our own reactions? That is why this scene has passed through the centuries in silence, waiting for someone willing to truly listen to it. And this question leads us directly to the end of the story and to the beginning of a personal decision. Jesus was taken away, the garden was left behind, the night continued, but something had changed forever. Malchus was healed, even though I didn't ask for it, even though I was on the wrong side of history, even though he came to arrest the Son of God. This detail reveals a profound truth. The love of Jesus does not depend on the intentions of those who encounter him. He heals in the midst of chaos. He acts even when he is rejected. He offers mercy where only judgment is expected. The Bible doesn't tell us whether Malchus believed. It doesn't tell us whether he became a disciple. Silence remains. And perhaps this isn't a void, but a mirror, because in the end, the question isn't about Malchus. It's about us. What do we do when Jesus reaches out to us, even when we are not seeking him? Do we sheath our swords, or do we continue fighting in our own way? This is one of most impactful biblical narratives, not because it ends with applause, but because it ends with a choice. And every time this story is told, this choice is placed before us once again. Perhaps you've never seen yourself as Malchus, but at some point in our lives, we've all been there. On the wrong side of history, wounded by choices, impulses, words, or reactions. And yet, Jesus draws near. He doesn't ask if you deserve it. He doesn't demand explanations. He simply touches and heals. Now I want to know from you, in what area of your life do you need to put away your sword and allow Jesus to restore what has been wounded? Write in the comments, Jesus, restore my heart, whether as an act of faith or as a silent request. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel now. Here, every week, we reveal Bible stories that almost no one tells, but they have the power to transform lives. Turn on notifications and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. And remember, the same Jesus who healed Malchus in the midst of chaos still heals today.